On today's episode of The Unwritten Rule, we are going to discuss the Darris Smith injury. Unfortunate blow, big one for the Missouri Tigers and their defensive line. We talked about the injury, and then we kind of segued that up until the first game. We're going to do just a couple of shows where we highlight some of the position groups that have a little bit more question marks, so not as much quarterbacks, wide receivers, just because everyone kind of knows what's going on with those groups, but a couple of other position groups have a little bit more question marks for Mizzou heading into 2024. So we segued the Darris Smith conversation into one about the defensive line, talked all about Johnny Walker on the edge and his backup, Zion Young, a couple of potential bench guys that could have an impact with Darris Smith out. Also talked about the D tackles, Christian Williams, Chris McClellan, and a couple of their backups. So it was a good conversation about the defensive tackles. Unfortunate conversation about Darris Smith, and obviously that is a big blow for Mizzou, the transfer from Georgia being out for the season with an injury. So we talked about all that stuff, but yeah, did a good breakdown on the defensive line and what that's going to look like in 2024 for Mizzou. And then we finished things off with quick hits. Talked, of course, some Tigers in the NFL, some Chris Abrams-Drain, Harrison Mevis, Cody Schrader. Had a funny photo of the wide receiver room at Sparky's, which we talked about. And yeah, a couple of other things. Anniversary of a big commit, too, that we touched on at the end of the show. So good show for you guys to start your weekend. Obviously, we tried to be as interesting as we could, not just be sad that Darris Smith is injured, but we did talk about that. But yeah, good breakdown of the DL for you guys to head into your weekend. Without further ado, the Unwritten Rule starts right now.
Marcel, where are you going with that disc? You are not putting that on again. Marcel, okay, if you press that button, you are in very, very big trouble.
Attention. Everybody stop what you're doing. It's time for The Unwritten Rule, a Mizzou sports podcast brought to you by the Believe Network, alongside Payton Haverman and Kenny Van Doren. Here is your host, Jack Knowlton.
Welcome back to the Unwritten Rule. Today is Friday, August 16th, and I'm introing with a somber tone because Mizzou, Payton and Kenny have been hit with their first blow of the season, first big blow, and that it comes in the form of Darris Smith. He suffered a knee injury in practice and will miss the entire 2024 season. Darris Smith, of course, the transfer from Georgia, defensive end, was expected to have a big impact. Hadn't played a ton in his first two seasons at Georgia, but looked like he was going to have a breakout year. He was having a great camp. This sucks. Your thoughts?
I agree, Knowlton. It does suck. Like you mentioned, Darris Smith was getting like rave reviews, particularly in spring camp. I think it was one of the big names that came up a lot. He was one of, if not the first newcomer to earn their number, which is a big thing for Drinkwitz. There have been big number sagas in the past, like with Damon Hazelton not earning his number until like about a week before games started. So it sucks. This is definitely a guy I think Mizzou was anticipating being maybe a starter. There's obviously, a lot of the defense I'm sure will look the same to last year, but there's new wrinkles, and one of those new wrinkles that Corey Batoon is going to add is that joker role that was under Kane Womack and the South Alabama defense. And that role is like well suited because it's a D end that also will have pass coverage responsibilities. That's well suited for really good athletes. And boy, that is what Darris Smith was. I mean, you just take a look at a photo of Darris Smith. The one thing that'll jump out at you immediately is how unbelievably long this dude's arms are. Just an athletic freak that I'm sure Mizzou had very high expectations for. You see there, if you're watching on the YouTube, he's 6'5", 240. Was going to, I really think he would have been the starter at that joker role, and they would have been able to let Johnny Walker just be the more traditional, just pass rush guy. I don't think Johnny Walker is ill-suited for the role, but it seemed like that role was just tailor-made for someone like Darris Smith, and I think it's a big blow to not have him.
Yeah, you talk about a lot of returners on the defense, a lot of returners all around on this team. There's still a lot of question marks on that defensive line. Yes, Mizzou has had success in the past with transfers. I mean, that 2022 defense was loaded with transfers, and it just kind of culminated into a really great defense in 2023 once everything started to get going. And you kind of expect that too. A lot of the same coaches. You lose Blake Baker. You bring in Corey Batoon, who's had rave reviews about his defense. And, you kind of expecting, that the Tigers will be all right. Tigers will be okay, but it does hurt. It hurts a lot to lose a guy like Darris Smith, especially just so early on, and it's going to be season ending right away. It doesn't even get to play in week one. It's going to be 2025 when he makes his Mizzou debut. So big blow there, and you just kind of look at it, a lot of transfers on that side, so you don't even know what to expect right away. You hear these reviews in camp, you just haven't seen him in that game action, and it would have been really cool to see all of it kind of pieced together on Thursday night to start the season. But right now, it's just one of those things where you kind of think about it. The Tigers have done well with transfers in the past, but it's also fair to say it's still a lot of question marks with that defensive line, kind of with some of these new guys trying to mesh well early on.
Well, I mean, it's fair to have that about Darris Smith too. I mean, he started 16 games in his first two, or played 16 games in his first 2 seasons at Georgia. Not a whole lot of PT. He had 5 tackles and a pass deflection. But I think, to Payton's point, like those athletic traits, the fit from a scheme perspective felt really there in a unit that's trying to replace a lot along the edge. So yeah, it's a blow for sure. And I mean, just you want to put it plain and simple terms, you get a transfer from Georgia, you probably want him to play. So it kind of, especially on the defensive line, which is a position group they're known for churning out guys. So Drinkwitz, he said, we're devastated by the injury to Darris. He was having an outstanding camp, was poised to have a great year. We'll support Darris in his recovery and look forward to him returning stronger than before. He can redshirt. He was a true junior coming into Mizzou, so he's still going to have 2 seasons of eligibility left, which is, I guess, a long-term good sign. But like you guys both said, doesn't bode great for an edge rusher room that Missouri has coming into next season. And to kind of segue off of that, and I think it's just it seems easy to dive into. We're doing a couple breakdowns on a few position groups with some question marks in the couple shows we had before the season. Thought we'd lend this injury to having us talk about the defensive line and talking about that edge rusher room. And Payton and Kenny, I'll go to something that Payton just touched on. I think the big question now, just with the room in general, becomes that joker position where you have Johnny Walker Jr. Coming back, obviously one of the biggest returners on the team, 41 tackles, 4 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. He obviously had the sack and the forced fumble against Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. Watch list for the Chuck Bednarik Award. He's a captain on this team. But like Payton said, was probably going to be, a little bit more deadly in that edge rusher position because of what Darris Smith brought. Now he's out. What do you guys think of Johnny Walker filling that joker role? I mean, Payton, you said he's capable, but, doesn't seem like the most ideal situation versus just letting him be maybe that traditional edge rusher.
I don't want to overblow I don't want to overblow thinking the season's over because they don't have the perfect fit for the joker role now. Because Corey Batoon, like any coach, is going to adjust to what he has. I mean, he'll probably maybe shade off a little bit more of that pass coverage responsibility from that position if Johnny Walker maybe can't handle it, if he is indeed the guy that they kind of rely upon as that. I would expect them to, because Johnny Walker had a breakout campaign last season. I will also say, yes, if he had Darris Smith, it maybe makes his life a little easier because maybe Johnny Walker can just handle being the traditional D end. But there is no one on earth on this roster that is going to replicate what Darius Robinson did for Mizzou on the other side of the D end, on the other side of the D line. So Johnny Walker was always going to have a little bit more of a spotlight on him from opposing offensive lines in general. I'm going to also throw a little bit of a name off the wall here. It's obviously very hard for freshman DN, no matter how good they are, to maybe get consistent snaps on the D line. But maybe if we're getting further and further into the season and Williams Nwaneri is looking a little more ready in practice, he is easily the best athletic fit to step up and take the joker role, I think. He, like Darris Smith, one of the first things that'll jump out at you is crazy, crazy long arms. That is something that he absolutely has in his tool bag working at his advantage. He's a super athletic dude like Darris Smith. He draws rave reviews from pretty much every scout that's watched him about his athleticism. A bit slender, I believe, right now, but that's natural for a freshman. That'll probably be one of the things he has to, just put on muscle like any other college freshman will have to. But he's super athletic. He has crazy long arms. I definitely think he's a good enough athlete to handle that Joker role should he need to step up into it. And actually, he's already 257, so listed at 257 on the Mizzou website. So again, he's a true freshman. Don't want to put too much on him. Mizzou is not going to rush him. But I think, just from in theory, as a pure athletic fit, Williams Nwaneri is definitely the second best behind Darris Smith for that Joker role.
And it's different than, like when Luther Burden played as a true freshman, wide receiver position to the defensive end position. It's not comparable in that sense of, getting young guys to play in there. But you expect a guy like him to maybe give you some kind of contribution early on. He was one of the top prospects in in this entire class, in the class of 2024. And you talk about that size, 6'6", 257 as an 18-year-old is massive. There's opportunity there to grow into it. Cut down, even maybe put more muscle, whatever the case may be for Williams. And with this injury, that opens up playing time. I think that does open up a lot of options on the depth on both edge positions. And I think that's where he kind of steps up. And with Corey Batum, talked about that. How does these guys fit into their defense? And it kind of goes back to what he mentioned a little bit earlier. I think we talked about a couple of weeks ago. We're talking about scheme, and maybe not worried too much about the scheme, but how these guys are developing, how are these guys getting off the line, getting past the tight end, getting past the tackles. How are they going to get to the quarterback, get to the ball? And I think that's going to be something that he's going to have to work on early on. You lost that guy, Darris Smith, who possibly was a starter, maybe even second stringer, just depending on what the scheme might have been. And I think this is an opportunity for them just kind of fit these guys in and adjust to what you have kind of moving forward in these early games.
I think it's interesting because, I think it had largely seemed like, along with Darris Smith, some of the guys, obviously the starters being Johnny Walker, there was Zion Young, Eddie Kelly from Georgia Tech, Sterling Webb and Gracialo are juniors, or I guess they're defensive tackles, which we'll get to them. But it was kind of like Darris Smith and then Joe Moore. Like Nwaneri, sort of like it looked like kind of was on the outside looking in. Like you said, Kenny, it wasn't going to be like a Luther situation. It was going to be harder for him to maybe get on the field. But I think, Payton, you make a really interesting point where, does he maybe jump up a few spots just given, you might have to call upon him if he does start performing well in practice. And I think, would you guys say that Mizzou's in a position, and I want to ask you about this guy. We're already going into the weeds. I want to talk about Zion Young too, but just while we're looking at that Joker position, I was looking at Joe Moore, who is listed on here this is just our lads, but obviously behind Darris Smith, who's out now, and Johnny Walker as the third stringer at that Joker role. I was just looking at him from from like a numbers perspective. 13 tackles last season, 1 sack. He played in a few games, has some pretty good PFF grades, had like an 84 tackle grade. What about Joe Moore? Kenny, I'll ask you about him first, and we'll go Payton. I'll flop the order. What do we think about Joe Moore? I know it's a little bit of a deep cut, but maybe do you see him similarly to Nwaneri? Maybe just kind of earns that spot given there's some injuries?
He's just so much older. I think it's just so hard to do that, but I understand it. Yeah. He had his moments last season. A couple opportunities there where he forced a fumble, picked up a fumble. There was a sack late that he's had. He's Missouri kid from the St. Louis area, ended up being a transfer from Arizona State. So guy who came back, we see that a lot where maybe there was not the best opportunity when he left the state. So he comes back. There's a guy in the secondary who did that. He's going to start this year as well, and Toriano Pride. So that's just where it kind of goes from there. I think he's a very good depth piece, kind of sneaky off the line. But, I'm not expecting too much from Joe Moore, and I think that's fair to say early on. Maybe there is an opportunity where he steps up, and he was kind of overshadowed last season from some really good defensive end play from Robinson. and Johnny Walker. So maybe he does step up, but I think it's just one of those things where Joe Moore is good, reliable depth. If you have a guy who's a redshirt senior, who's been at the Power 5 level with 2 different teams and, knows this defense well. And I mean, I haven't heard any negative things about it, but watching on the sidelines, looks like Joe Moore is, in it with those guys. It seems like they like him and he just kind of fits well with this team, but I think it is good depth. But there's another guy that's going to be fighting for those snaps after this injury.
Payton, I'll ask you this with Joe Moore versus if it's kind of coming out that both him and Nwaneri are maybe kind of on equal footing in practice, you'd prefer to see Williams getting those snaps?
To me, I don't think it's a situation where they're going to be competing for each other's snaps. Because I mean, like you mentioned earlier, Batoon made it like he essentially said players, not plays. When he was asked about the scheme similarities. So I think, like Kenny mentioned, and really like we talked about to depth, one of my favorite things Mizzou did last year was just rotate in so many different DNs throughout the year. You had guys like Austin Firestone had a big sack against Vanderbilt on a 4th down in the 4th quarter last year. Joe Moore was the guy who maybe plays 30% of the pass rush snaps, and he was the one that got the game-clinching fumble recovery against Ohio State. So I really don't think it's a Nwaneri versus Joe Moore situation, really. And I don't really think Joe Moore is necessarily, like, I know it says on our LEDs he's lined up as the Joker. I don't necessarily think that's set in stone or anything like that. I really don't think any of these positions are set like in stone. I think Batoon will just use who he feels is a good fit for the situation they're in. Like maybe on 3rd and short, you're expecting a run. Maybe you go to Joe Moore. If it's a 3rd and long, you maybe want to bring a little pressure. You bring in Williams Nwaneri. I really think it's just a situation where it's how Blake Baker did it last year. He'd rotate in DNs based on how he saw the situation. I have a very good feeling we'll see a similar usage this season.
I think, I mean, and then it kind of feels, I guess I'll gauge this overall and you can answer this quickly or take as long as you need. Generally, then, you look at this depth now without Darris Smith. I mean, would you say you're pretty confident then in just how Mizzou can overall rotate those guys in, or does that now feel a lot thinner now that he's gone?
I don't want to say a lot thinner. It's definitely, it hurts because, I mean, now you are like, you still, I think, have the starting 2 DNs this year are absolutely going to be Johnny Walker and Zion Young, I think. I don't think there's any doubt about that now. And I think if you can even get similar, like if Johnny Walker, he doesn't have to be Darius Robinson, but if he can sort of be close-ish to Darius Robinson, and Zion Young can step up and be close-ish to what Johnny Walker was for them last year, I think you're still getting good enough production out of your DN room. And I think they have good enough bodies behind them to rotate in, like we mentioned with Joe Moore, like we mentioned with Eddie Kelly. There are some guys that aren't even listed on our LEDs that you could maybe see step up. I know Jakai Lang was a name I feel like we heard a lot about as a true freshman, and now he's in his 2nd or 3rd year. I will say, like, one more injury, and I think it starts to get scary in this room. Like, even to a 2nd stringer, maybe like Eddie Kelly or like Joe Moore, if one of them goes down with a long-term injury, then you're probably hurting a bit. It's kind of funny. Now I feel like the retirement of Austin Firestone from football hurts Mizzou a little bit because he was clearly a guy they trusted. He had a couple moments last year. You need guys like that are good depth, can rotate in and make a play for you.
Yeah, it's simply like something to kind of keep an eye on, or just keep an ear out for in these next couple of weeks of these last few practices. Are there any defensive ends, edge rushers that are the names you're hearing, some of the younger guys that you haven't heard before? And I kind of go back to 2022, and I will say I do think the defensive end room is in a better position in 2022 because in 2022, albeit there were some injuries and opt-outs, but by the end of the season, they had defensive tackles on the outside of the defensive line. And I think that's where it kind of just comes down to that you need that depth no matter what. Injuries do hurt, but I mean, who's the next guy to step up? And that's where you get guys like Joe Moore, who's had these opportunities before. You kind of just want to see how that happens. And, it's Jay Jernigan's not on this team anymore, but I don't think he would fit out on the defensive end again. So it's just good to keep everyone healthy and kind of keep this defensive line intact. Because I mean, look at it: Eddie Kelly, Jr., Darris Smith, who was a junior, but there's guys there that are tenured and they've been in the Power 4, Power 5. So just kind of keeping those guys healthy is really what your focus has to be moving forward.
I think that's a good comparison you make going back to 2022 as opposed to last year, because like Payton said, you were never going to replace, no matter if you had Darris Smith or not, you were never going to replace what Darius Robinson brought you. But if you can avoid collectively like you said, having to shift defensive tackles out and just pigeonholing people where the fit is completely off, yeah, I think that's a lot better. And before we shift inside, I think we should talk about Zion Young just quickly. And obviously, we'll get a better judge of him. He's one of those transfers. We'll see, how well he sticks. But like Payton said, pretty much going to be the guaranteed starter now. And where he plays, I think, is interesting. And I think this also plays into the point you both made about how Batoon might just kind of use guys everywhere. Zion Young, I was reading early on when he was brought in, was maybe seen as someone who could also take that joker role. He had 2 really productive seasons at Michigan State, 26 tackles, 1.5 sacks last year, 21 tackles in 2022. Also grades out okay on PFF. Just any quick thoughts on him? I know, it's obviously hard when you haven't seen him on the field yet, but again, seems like kind of one of those solid depth pieces that has proven he's a capable starter at the Power 5. Obviously, Mizzou, a little bit of a higher level, I would say, than Michigan State at this point. But what do you guys think of Zion Young?
Yeah, I mean, I will say in the Big Ten, your numbers as a pass rusher are gonna be naturally lower because that league does not throw the ball very much. I think Zion Young is a name that you've kind of, like, all the beat reporters have kind of had some buzz around. So that's a good sign. Like we said, Johnny Walker is going to have to take the attention that Darius Robinson had last year, and he's going to have to find a way to make it work. I'm confident he will. Johnny Walker is obscenely talented, and he finally had his breakout last year. Zion Young's going to need to kind of take a similar jump, I think, that Johnny Walker did last year. He doesn't have to be like a 8 or 9 sack guy this season, but if Zion Young can bring the quarterback down 5 or 6 times, that will go a long way for Mizzou. He's a guy that definitely was. Mizzou was in the weeds with a lot of different DNs. There was Nick Scrouton, who wound up going to Texas A&M. There was Princely, who wound up going to Ole Miss. They were in on a ton of those guys, and Zion Young was someone who a lot of teams were after. So it's clear there's intrigue there. I think you're almost certainly getting him and Johnny Walker off the edge on snap 1, and I'm optimistic that they can get good production out of that group.
Payton, just small trivia here. A question for you. Zion Young played in 20 games across 2 seasons for Michigan State. Guess how many sacks he had?
He had 1.5 last year, Knowlton said.
Yeah, sorry, I gave one of those answers away.
I'm going to say he had 3.
It's a good guess. He had 2.5.
2.5
in his career. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see some chaos from those 2 edge spots, opening up the tackles, probably helping out those defensive tackles at the same time. We've seen that conversation a lot. Defensive tackles probably don't get enough, enough praise for what they do, but a lot of their stuff is trying to get the edge rushers onto the outside and into the backfield. So a lot of conversations there with that. And, I just want to see more chaos. I think that was one of the big things that worked under Blake Baker. And, if you can get that chaos from your defensive ends and just that defensive line in total, I think that's a good start to the season.
And I do want to add, like, it's not like going to only be like the pressure, like Kenny was mentioning, like Blake Baker loved to throw the most exotic blitzes you've ever seen in your life at teams. And it worked a lot. I mean, I remember in 2022, they had this insane looking like 4-4 stack where Blake Baker literally sent 4 linebackers at the quarterback. It was chaos every snap. So that, like, Mizzou, assuming Batoon doesn't change that much up, you're not gonna just need to get production from your D line to rush the passer. I mean, they're not going to be afraid to send Dalen Carnell at the quarterback like they did a bunch last year. you'll have Chuck Hicks and Tristan Newsome and whoever else at linebacker blitz the quarterback plenty of times. So it doesn't have to all be on Johnny Walker and Zion Young or Christian Williams and Chris McClellan. There will be plenty of exotic looks that I'm sure alleviate some of the pressure on the D-line as well.
It's a very good point. There's one thing I know about Kane Womack. I've learned he did the same thing. Does a lot of safety blitzes, lots of complex things. And so Batoon, you'd assume, kind of carries the same thing forward. Let's shift interiorly. And I want to ask you this, Kenny, and I think you just said it with, some of these guys kind of going under the radar and being, kind of unnoticed. The defensive tackle position along the D line, Payton mentioned Christian Williams, Chris McClellan, pretty clearly going to be the two starters. I think we can all agree on that. Christian Williams, how important is he for this team in general? Just in terms of his value, because I think he's someone that like you touched on, Kenny, is incredibly underrated in terms of if he has a good year, how far this defense can go.
Yeah, I mentioned it a couple times, and I believe he is a captain this year as well.
Yes.
Going into the season. So we'll get to that in quick hits, talk a little bit more about the captains. But yeah, I mean, he's pivotal. He's a guy who's probably would have started on a couple, maybe some SEC schools, but definitely a lot of Power 5 schools last season, a little bit more, and maybe even in 2022 coming over from Oregon. I think there's a lot to like about Christian Williams, and I think it's not even just the play. I mean, he's very aggressive. He's a bulldozer at the defensive tackle position. He's also just a good leader, and I think it just kind of comes down to that. I think he's going to be a good voice this season. You look at some other guys that are gone now, and like Jay Jernigan, who I mentioned earlier. And so I think there's an opportunity there for him to step up and just be that leader on the interior line. Don't know a lot about Chris McClellan other than just his play on the field at Florida, but you look at a guy like Christian Williams, and I think it's a full package. And I think that's him coming back is very crucial. It's a redshirt senior season last year with the Tigers. And I think it's just going to be a lot there. And I kind of wanted to pivot that into some of these younger guys that he's probably helping out a lot into these practices. And that's Marquise Gracial and Jalen Marshall, who are redshirt sophomores. So their first season was in 2022, our senior year. And I mean, I heard their names so much that season, and we barely saw them on the field. And we've barely seen them on the field since their freshman season. Marquise Gracial was a part of some of those groups that were traveling with the teams. Some of those freshmen, they got opportunities to be depth guys. I remember he was at the South Carolina game. I think even maybe the Florida game when some of those guys started to pick up a little bit on the freshman class. And I mean, Marquise Gracial, St. Louis kid, Jalen Marshall from the Kansas area. These are two guys that have, been around the program for a while. And I think this is an opportunity for them to step up. Of course, Sterling Webb has that experience in New Mexico State, but these are two guys that have been around this system. I know it's changed a little bit with the new defensive coordinator, but they've been around these guys. And those are two guys that I'm kind of leaning on to see a little bit more of, definitely a lot more of this season.
Yeah, I think you nailed it with Christian Williams, particularly with the leadership thing. I mean, this is clearly a guy Mizzou absolutely trusts with being a defensive captain. They brought him down to SEC Media Days. And he was, like you said, I mean, it was a very productive room, that D tackle room last year. I mean, you had Jay Jernigan, Josh Landry. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone. There was another in that top four that I'm forgetting, but Christian Williams was a big contributor. And like you said, I mean, we've heard Marquise Gracial and Jalen Marshall's names so much. Like, the staff likes these guys, clearly. It's just they were behind such a good group of D tackles that they didn't really have an opportunity. I know Marquise Gracial actually talked to the media this week, and he said he doesn't care much about his playing time. He said something to the effect of, if I'm not playing a lot and we're winning, I'm happy. If I'm playing a lot and we're winning, I'm happy. So he knows his time is coming. I'm sure both him and Marshall have heard over and over from the staff, hey, we like you. We're going to get you on the field here soon. Just be patient. And that might happen this year. I still think the D tackle room is one of no concern to me. I have no misgivings at all with how it's constructed. They went and padded the depth with Sterling Webb, the transfer from New Mexico State as well. I believe he's from Missouri as well, from high school. So I'm very confident in that group. Don't think there will be any hiccups there.
I want to shout out one more guy too. And if you're looking on our lads, Sam Williams, that name might be pretty familiar for some people. He was a Wake Forest in the class of 2023. He flipped from Wake Forest. during the bowl game. Just the next day on signing day, he signed with the Tigers. He liked Mizzou. He was when I spoke to him back in 2022, it seemed like, Wake Forest is a good school, but there was more opportunities for him at Mizzou, and ended up making probably the better decision, seeing where the trajectory of these two schools are going in the football programs. So I think Sam Williams, that guy that we haven't heard much about, when I talk to him, very soft-spoken guy, just says what he needs to say. But another guy that it's interesting to see him already on the depth chart. Of course, this is not set in stone, and maybe we'll start to see some depth charts starting to float in, especially with the Thursday game coming up soon. So that's another guy that I just want to throw out there.
I'm gonna add another one on there, and I think I agree with you, Payton, that the D tackle room doesn't feel like a worry to me. I was looking into Sterling Webb, and yeah, another guy who they kind of like Toriano Pride and some others kind of brought home from St. Louis. He was pretty good in 2 seasons for New Mexico State. Did have a terrible tackle grade on PFF, but he had 28 tackles, 4.5 sacks last year. Obviously New Mexico State to Mizzou is a big jump, but especially that with a homecoming St. Louis kid, I've got my eye on Sterling Webb. He might be a guy that, if you're in the Mizzou bar and he comes into the game, you're like, oh, I like this kid. And then he gets a sack. You look really smart. So I don't know, buy some stock now in Sterling Webb. At least that's my take. Real quick on Chris McClellan. Yeah.
Mizzou did a showcase for Sterling Webb in 2022. It was the coldest game that I've ever been to, and I hope I never have to experience that again.
Is that oh yeah, for New Mexico State?
I was bundled up.
That game was awful. Kenny, you were not cold. You were in the press box.
When I walked on the field, I was.
Oh my gosh, you weren't sitting in the stands with the grit and grinders like us.
It's so cold as he sits holding hot chocolate in the press box.
Yeah. Real quick on Chris McClellan, and I'm going to start with a quote because you guys talked about Christian Williams' leadership for some of these younger guys. Chris McClellan feels it too. I thought this stood out to me. He said, "My relationship with Christian Williams is really good. I think that's actually somebody I try to look up to because he always does everything right. So you should emulate that. Our relationship is really good on and off the field. I feel like we complement each other and our play styles mesh really well." 23 tackles, half a sack last season at Florida, had 21 tackles in 2022. Pretty productive. Payton, I'll ask you this. He is coming from a defense, and he talked about this in an article I read. He's coming from a defense where he played. It was a 3-3-5. Now he's transitioning to a 4-2-5. Has said it's been a little bit early on, like a little bit of a culture shock for him. Is that, maybe talk about that transition, but I think overall Chris McClellan seems like a guy who's going to fit in pretty well when he starts playing.
If you look on the YouTube, there's a beautiful photo of Christian Williams there.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just natural. I mean, there's a lot of transfers going through what he's going through. Quite frankly, I think Chris McClellan will realize quickly everything that Florida has been doing football-wise the last few years is completely out of whack and bad. So I think he'll get used to it rather quickly. Plus, I mean, it's like you said and like what he said in that quote. I mean, playing next to Christian Williams has to make that process a million times smoother. McClellan's is a pretty big get for Mizzou because you look at his numbers and they don't pop out at you, but that's not a bad thing for being a D tackle. This was a guy that Colorado was very heavily after, and say what you want about Colorado. Deion has some sway on the recruiting trail. Absolutely. No doubt about it. Oklahoma wanted McClellan really badly too. I believe, if you guys remember when Drinkwitz was in a recruit's house when he popped on SEC Network that one time, I believe he was at Chris McClellan's house when he did that. So very clearly a big priority for them. Very confident in his ability next to Christian Williams. Again, I know Mizzou wanted to add another D tackle this past spring. They tried to get Dominic Williams, who went to Oklahoma. There was an LSU transfer, or not an LSU transfer, the guy that went to Miami, whose name is escaping me. I know they wanted another D tackle. I don't really think they needed one. I think they're good. I feel pretty good about this room.
Yeah, I like this room. I think it looks good. Also, Kenny, I'll let you go, but Christian Williams, the Nike FC neon thing he was wearing, love that. First of all, it's just a little soccer hoodie, but yeah, that's a middle school. I feel like that's a middle school me fit. The all neon headbands, got the like ski glasses. Shout out.
Yeah, this was a very very fun one, and it takes me back to the conversation we had with him about him not trusting his teammates that litter or leave trash around their lockers. So I bet the locker room's staying clean under Captain Christian Williams. And another thing that came to my mind is when we were talking to Gabe a couple months ago, and he mentioned, I was like, if they don't land Chris McCullough, I mean, what's next? And he's like, they have to get somebody. And they got Sterling Webb, but I think they do trust a lot and Christian Williams. And then some of these guys are coming up behind him. And, developing defensive tackles takes time. You don't see a lot of rookies that are just these large standouts because it's a position you have to grow in. You have to grow in physique, body, a lot of mental stuff too at that position about how you're helping those guys on the outside and helping your own self on the inside. So I think that this is a time that I hope we get to see Marquise Gracial and Jalen Marshall a lot early on. And I mean, if there's a story out there, maybe about, the leadership that Christian Williams is showing again, I'd love to read that just because that was 2 years ago. I was hearing these stories about Christian Williams being a leader in the locker room. And he wasn't even a starter. He started some games in 2022, but he wasn't one of the primary guys. I mean, he was one of the primary guys, but he wasn't the big guy at the defensive tackle position, especially with D-Rob still on the interior. So this is huge. I think that's just something I want to learn a little bit more on. If anybody has a story out there about Christian Williams.
It may have been 2 years ago, but I think you should caveat with the fact that was Christian Williams' true senior year. He's heading into his 6th season of college football in 2024. So that is not a sophomore you're looking at if you're watching on the YouTube. Is he older than us? He might be our age.
I think he's about, if
Christian
not
Williams.
older than us.
It's wild. Still, it's nice we can still say that about players still in college, because that obviously gets old very fast. Kenny's researching his age. Yeah, experience 2019. That was the same graduating class as the three of us on this pod. There you go. So there's a look at the defensive line. Any other final thoughts? Anything you guys want to throw in there before I think we summed it up pretty well. Johnny Walker, Christian Williams going to be huge contributors next year.
I got one thing.
Yes.
It's kind of a joke. Payton mentioned earlier about, Drinkwitz really liking these numbers. I remember specifically one time that he was not happy that someone was talking about numbers, and that was when Luther Burden showed up to the first practice with the number 3. Of course, Luther Burden was going to get that number no matter what, and he was going to get that number faster than anyone else. But everyone was so excited to ask him questions because everyone thought, oh, this is going to be good. He's going to have some good stories, some good thoughts about it. And he was like, no, it's not a big deal. We just thought Luther deserved the number, and he was ready to have it. And everyone was a little bit like, oh, okay, he doesn't really want any positive light around his star wide receiver.
He's come a long way. He needed to learn how to market his stars. He's come a long way. Drinkwitz, you have to now that he's had a good season under his belt, he can get a lot more which actually we've weirdly seen him almost shrivel up after having a good year. But with stuff like that, I feel like now he can be more open.
Do you remember when they were having Brady Cook versus Tyler Macon for the starting QB job? And Drinkwitz said, Drinkwitz went out and said, neither of them are going to talk to the media at all this offseason. And they reversed course a few hours later.
And that's something I want to talk about too. In that press conference, he brought both of them up to the stand. They both said that they were best friends, and it was the most scripted thing I'd ever heard. And Drinkwitz was standing in the room the whole time. I remember he was just standing off to the side with Molly, who was in charge, and just smiling. I think he just thought it was fun that he finally gave everyone a chance to talk to the quarterbacks. And it was just, coach speech that they were giving. And I just loved how they said they were just the best of friends, and ended up just being Brady Cook's job.
What a time 2022 Mizzou football was. What a time. We've come a long way.
That was
there you go. There's a look at the D-line. We will have a couple other group breakdowns for just some of these other kind of more interesting ones. Obviously, not really going to hit on quarterback and wide receiver.
Yeah, there's nothing in the quarterback room to break down when Drinkwitz emphatically says, Brady Cook is 1, Drew Pine is 2, Aiden Glover is 3.
Yeah, so we're not doing that, spoiler alert, but we'll do some other position groups. But for now, for the rest of this show, we'll finish it off with quick hits. Okay, quick hits to finish off the show. We will start with jerseys of the week. Kenny, what's your jersey of the week?
Goes to Cody Schrader, 49ers running back. And this has nothing to do with his play on the field right now in the NFL or in preseason. It has to do with something that happened in 2022. This week comes from Arthrex. There's an article there about Cody Schrader. Kind of starts off with same old, walk on at Mizzou football.
He was?
Pretty tough journey. Yeah, and that's what I kind of thought it was. And then out of nowhere, it talks about how he tore a labrum in his shoulder. And if you remember, Brady Cook played on a torn labrum in his shoulder in 2022, came out in 2023 and had his best collegiate season. Cody Schrader played pretty well in 2022 and then came out in 2023 with one of his best seasons. I think we should tear our labrums and our shoulders. Maybe we'll get better at podcasting and people will start to like us.
Boy, 2022 was literally the worst year ever. I mean, that was just a miserable season, and everybody apparently tore their labrums. I guess I can't wait to randomly have the Luther Burden torn labrum reveal, or the Theo Weiss torn labrum at Oklahoma reveal. I had no idea. I don't know why Drinkwitz didn't mention this ever. Would have made the story even better. But you know, it's not like it needed much more, to be honest. I mean, he became a phenomena rather. And now look at him in an NFL training camp fighting for a roster spot. So good for Cody.
Well, yeah, it's a good point. Like, Cody Schrader doesn't need the torn labrum story, but I wouldn't mind manufacturing a narrative that Luther Burden played all of last season with a torn labrum. I feel like that would help his case. And then this year he's healthy. If he does way better this year, #1 pick.
If he followed the trajectory, we're probably looking at like a 2,500 yard receiving season. If we're projecting increases in production based off Mizzou torn labrums.
Luther Burden's going to receive 4,000 yards of passes.
Yeah.
Yep. Can go crazy. Yeah, nice. Good story. Hopefully Cody Schrader makes the 49ers. Payton, your jersey.
My jersey of the week. I know Harrison Mevis was just cut by the Panthers, but if it makes up for it, SEC Network gave Harrison Mevis's 61-yard field goal against Kansas State the #7 ranking on its top 10 plays of the decade. Feels like there was a lot of recency bias on this list. There was like 4 plays from 2023. But yeah, Harrison Mevis, he was #7. And I do think that can probably earn, like on the right, like in the right circumstances, that can probably earn like a top 10 spot. But I mean, you got to remember all the crazy SEC plays in the last 10 years.
I think
Forgot about that Bo Nix play.
Yeah, if you're watching on the YouTube, I put the tweet in there.
Yeah, Payton, I'm not gonna lie. I didn't really hear what you were saying. I was just watching them.
Yeah, LSU game-winning 2-point conversion against Alabama in 2022 is #8, which I don't know, man. I don't know about that. Here is Harrison Mevis, #7 though.
See, I think my whole thing with these top 10 plays lists is it's like with the 2-point conversion, it's like, yes, the gravity of the game was really big, but the play wasn't that crazy. Like Harrison Mevis, the play was a big moment, but it was also like insane that he hit a field goal from that far away. Like I usually think top 10 plays, I think like that it's just a crazy highlight, like this one-handed catch.
See, I like to when I look at top 10 plays, I like the impact of the moment being featured. Okay. But that LSU 2-point conversion, it just, instead of LSU being 8-4, they went 9-3 and won the Citrus Bowl. I mean, it didn't do that much. I will say in extreme cases, like this Arkansas 4th and 25 against Ole Miss, like, yeah, that has to be on the list, even if it's not that impactful, like for a season.
Yeah, that was wild. Also, the kick 6, too old to be featured on here. If you want to feel old, that was 11 years ago.
Which means the Georgia play that happened the week before is also too old to be on here.
Yep. #1 was Tua to Devonta Smith in the national championship, if you were wondering. But
yes, it was.
Should we just let him? Should we just talk through and let the rest of them play?
Nope. All right, moving on.
#4. McKenny said no. My jersey of the week, going back to the NFL, it is Chris Abrams-Drain. That is Broncos rookie cornerback Chris Abrams-Drain, which just feels so weird to say still. He had a very good week 1 of preseason, 19 coverage snaps, 0 yards allowed, 90.1 coverage grade. I also saw he intercepted. They played the Colts. Quiz, did you guys see who he picked off?
Yes, we talked about it.
Oh. Yeah, it was Bean from Kansas
Jason
State.
Bean.
Or just Kansas.
Kansas.
Right. Yeah.
So some still Mizzou and Kansas crime. I hope you guys can't hear my dryer going off. But yeah.
Sure can't.
KAD It's very loud. It plays the like jingle. You ever have those dryers that do like the super long? Like,
You want to talk about Chris Abrams' drain, man?
I just did. He said he intercepted Jason Bean. You said he already talked about it. I got to
Not on the
show.
show.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We talked about it off air. Yeah, he intercepted Jason Bean, which I thought was fun because it's a Mizzou and Kansas crime. Anyways, very good. And
90 coverage grade is pretty nuts.
It still feels weird to say that he's like a Broncos cornerback. Like, it's weird to see that. It's weird to see the 31.
31, yeah.
I don't love 31. Too bad it's a poverty team. Yeah, Broncos stink. Broncos stink. All right.
I like no capping. He's the main bird.
Shawnee's made for the week. Kenny.
We missed this last week and this weekend, but Brad, Larrondo, this is a report from Pete Thamel of ESPN. The CEO of every True Tiger Brands and NIL marketing and branding agency from Missouri Athletics. I think we brought up Larrondo before, but his connection. He worked at Auburn and the War Eagle.
Don't ask why it's War Eagle. Yeah, he's the CEO of every True Tiger Brands, the NIL marketing, which is, like Kenny said.
Just read that, lad.
Yeah,
I know. Do you want me to finish the? Okay, go on, move on.
No, I kind of. What were you going to say? What were you
I have nothing to say. Move on.
What were you going to say that was new to that? You just repeated what he said.
Nothing.
The only thing I was going to add is, the guy like isn't super relevant when the photo Pete Thamel uses just a picture of the Mizzou Block M helmet, and he doesn't even have a picture.
It's always the same photo
on the tweet. Yeah, that's the
Block
stock
M
images. That's a print journalism, like, funny if you kind of work in there. But anyway, all right, Payton, what's your jersey of the week? Not jersey of the week, your main bird of the week.
My main bird of the week is going to be Jimmy McKinney, who used to play for Missouri basketball. He is now the head coach of Vashon basketball in St. Louis. The connection of the bird is St. Louis is now the Cardinals, or they have the Cardinals rather, the baseball team. So Jimmy McKinney, who also acted, I don't know if you guys knew this, he was an actor in a movie in 2002. He is now the head coach at Vashon High School, which is also his alma mater.
Yeah, Vashon assistant head coach Jimmy McKinney has been named the head basketball coach of the Vashon Wolverines. What movie is that?
Thanks, Kenny.
The movie was, I had it up and hold on, I already clicked off his tab. The movie he was an actor in was Street Ballers.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, the former Wolverine and Missouri Tiger. McKinney's been a part of 5 state championships teams at Vashon. Also led the Wolverines to 3 state titles as a player under the legendary Floyd Irons. That's a fire name. Named the Gatorade Player of the Year and twice in the state of Missouri. Thanks for that, Payton.
Yep.
Good
Kenny
name.
found it.
Congrats on Jimmy McKinney. My main bird of the week is going to an establishment, and my bird connection is I actually had something and I forgot what it was. I was going to make some loose joke. Someone on the St. Louis Cardinals has probably been in this place. It's Sparky's Ice Cream in Columbia. I had another connection I was going to say, and I totally forgot it. Right when we pull it up. Anyway, my main bird is going to Sparky's Ice Cream. Jacob Peeler, Mizzou's wide receiver coach, just posted this fun photo of a bunch of the wide receivers. Yeah, I have the reason I wanted to bring this up. We got to do some fit reviews here because Luther Burden, he kind of cracked me up. He's got the Simpsons, Homer Simpson pajamas on with the donuts. Do you think Luther Burden's watched The Simpsons? I guess that show's still on, but that's he's
those are awesome.
I love The Simpsons.
He doesn't strike me as a religious Simpsons watcher, but I'm sure he's seen some episodes.
Yeah. Also, Theo Weiss looks like he's 7
so tall.
No wonder he wins 50-50 balls all the time.
Howard.
I really like the guy in the John Deere hoodie. I don't know who that is, but
dude, where are his feet? You can't see his feet.
Well, they were probably there. They are. Oh, I get what you're saying.
You can't see them.
Wow, Crocs and a John Deere hoodie.
It's a country fit. You got James Madison over on the right with he's just got kind of a hoodie on, but I just love seeing James Madison. He made a nasty catch in a practice the other day too. So shout out Sparky's Ice Cream. That'd be kind of fun if you're employing just the entire Mizzou wide receiver room and probably some GAs just stroll in. I guess you'd be pretty busy. But
I don't think it'd be cool. I think it'd be like, dang, I have to make a lot of ice cream cones now.
there's only like 2 of them holding ice cream. Do you think the rest of them just ate it before they took the photo? They just
Probably.
went along.
Also, Curtis Looper and his group went to Andy's. So clearly there was some sort of scrimmage in practice because it had the same caption. And they went to Andy's and got ice cream there, or
Do you think
frozen
Luther,
custard, rather.
Do you think Luther struck up an NIL deal while he was there? Just added another one?
Probably not. No, I don't.
He's
think so.
actually
Love
only
Luther's
a-
pose.
This is interesting. Luther is actually only allowed to eat Emo's pizza, nothing else. That's part of his deal. Just Emo's. Yeah, anyway, we love our Mizzou wide receivers. All right. Finished off with the best things we learned this week. Payton, you're up first for this one. What'd you learn?
Best thing I learned this week, we have to send a big shout out to Kansas State once again because Missouri has sold out its season tickets for the season. I don't know the last time that happened. I didn't see it tweeted anywhere. But yeah, now Missouri for this upcoming season has sold out all of its season tickets. They don't have all sellouts this season yet. There are still Murray State and Buffalo tickets available. I can't really blame people for not being too pumped to see that, but maybe they'll sell out closer to the time of the game. You had the video of Drinkwitz here tweeted by Mizzou Athletics thanking the fans for it. Yeah, I don't think if you had told me a couple years ago that Mizzou would be able to sell out the season tickets, I probably would have said, wow, Luther Burden must have been very good. And that turned out to be true.
I have a thing. I don't like the Drinkwitz, what he's going on with the beard. I think he needs to shave it.
Glad you said it.
It doesn't look good.
I don't know, man. It kind of gives off that like all-in vibe. Like he's
yeah, I guess if all
He
in
doesn't
looks
have
like
time
you've
for
been
things
locked
like
in a
that.
cave for like a week. Like he looks like he's just like
He's in the
hasn't been
lab,
able
dude.
to.
The king of facial hair is the one talking too.
Me? Oh yeah. I've had some bad ones, but this isn't good. This isn't good.
No.
From one person who can't do facial hair to, I guess, another. Shave that Drinkwitz. That's
I think it's fine, Drink. It shows you're locked in.
Gritty.
Yeah.
All right. I can't stand this repeat video of him pointing at the football. Move on. Kenny.
Best thing I learned this week are the captains for the 2024 Mizzou football teams. Theo Weiss Jr., mentioned him earlier, Christian Williams, Brady Cook, Johnny Walker Jr., and Chuck Hicks. No surprises here for me. I think this is a good group of guys. A lot of experience there with 3 of these guys being transfers and been around college football for a long time, and Weiss, Williams, and Hicks, and then 2 homegrown guys in Cook and Walker. Of course, we knew Brady Cook was going to be one. Christian Williams felt like a slam dunk, and to be honest with you, Chuck Hicks did as well. But good to see Johnny Walker and Theo Weiss, getting into that fold as well.
Yeah, I don't think any of these caught me by surprise. I don't know if I expected Johnny Walker. I will say that. But I mean, Luther Burden and others have talked. I know Drinkwitz had that press conference last week where they talked about how much just Theo Weiss's senior leadership had like kind of impacted the wide receiver room. Obviously, your quarterback is typically your captain. Christian Williams, I think was a foregone conclusion. And Chuck Hicks, this is like his 12th year in college, so figured he picked up a thing or two about leadership.
Him and Christian Williams, old.
Yeah, it's easier to point out about Chuck Hicks. I didn't even know Christian Williams was that old, but Chuck Hicks feels like this is like year 9.
It does feel like.
I swear he committed to Mizzou as a transfer when we were freshmen in 2019.
No, Dalen Carnell. It's the only one.
I mean, was Dalen Carnell expected to be one? I don't really think I expected that.
That was just the only other name I really thought of.
No Brett LeBlanc?
Maybe in the future. He's only a sophomore. He's got time.
Honestly,
Has anyone on special teams been a captain recently?
Eric
but
Link
Brett's
is
gonna
always
do
a
it.
captain.
Brett's going to take it. 2 years.
Definitely.
Put the house on
Definitely not any of the punters because they haven't been around long enough. Like even in the last 5 years, they just aren't.
Yeah, because they keep rolling through them because none of them are any good.
Yeah, it's bad. We had a good convo about special teams a couple episodes back. Go listen to it. All right, the best thing I learned this week. It's not as fun because we're technically recording a day after it happened, but 1 year ago on Wednesday, Williams Nwaneri committed to Mizzou. yeah, obviously there was this video that went pretty nuts when he committed. Obviously, one of the biggest recruits in school history, so that was pretty fun. Hopefully, he gets on the field a good bit. I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and again, like you see the reaction from the coaching staff. Obviously, they caught a lot of flack from other SEC fan bases. I don't know what people want, like from coaches that get 5-star commits. Do they want them to be like, "Oh, nice, great"? You think Nick Saban, when he got a commit,
they do,
would just be
actually.
like, you think Nick Saban, when he got a commit, wouldn't at least give a little fist pump or some sort of celebration? No. I don't think he was total stone cold, like, great, can't wait to have you. I think he was a little excited.
My theory would be Nick Saban probably just delegated all that, and then on August 1st, right before he started fall camp, he was just like, "All right, guys, how we doing? We got 4 or 5 stars, not enough. Keep going."
There are 2 guys on this couch that live in Baton Rouge now.
That's not nice.
We should have blurred their faces.
The first guy Drinkwitz hugs is the one who left with Blake Baker.
Well,
some job you did, Kevin Peoples, couldn't even take him with you.
Couldn't flip him. There you go. Hope Williams Nwaneri is really good. That's all I have. Peyton, do you have a joke for us? Actually, I almost think we should let Kenny do the joke because of what you did to his quick hit. That almost feels like it's only fair.
Well, I was in the middle of a talking point and I was interrupted. But fine, Kenny can do joke of the day.
Let me find one.
Peyton, you can tell your joke while Kenny's finding one.
I didn't have it pulled up anyways. So.
All right, I got one.
Some podcast we are. All right.
I think you probably heard this one before. I told my girlfriend she drew eyebrows too high. She seemed surprised.
That's a good one.
This is one that you can actually answer.
You saying I think you've heard these before makes them a million times funnier. You probably heard this one.
It got 0 laughs on Laugh Factory. This is where I find my jokes. How do you make a tissue dance?
Say that again?
How do you make a tissue dance?
I've heard this one.
The choo-choo slide.
No, I've 100% heard this one. I don't remember the answer though, and I don't want to hold up the podcast.
You put a little boogie in it.
I've 1,000,000% heard it.
All right, last one. This one gets a little dark. My grandfather has the heart of a lion and a lifetime ban from the zoo. Thank you for watching this week. That's a good one.
Those are good.
That's a good one. Well done, Kenny. He's coming for your joke of the day throne, Peyton. We might have to make a pivot. I have to make a pivot.
I'm running out of jokes on that Today Show website.
You need to just start pulling them from other sources and just say they're from the Today Show. We're not gonna.
That's intellectual dishonesty.
Peyton doesn't commit that. He's a student. All right. Until next time, we'll do another position group on for Monday's show. But till then, enjoy your weekend. Football's almost here, everybody. We'll be back on Monday.